On the 31st day of May, 1889, more than 2,000 lives were lost when the South Fork Dam collapsed. An entire lake, 20 million tons of water, crashed down the Conemaugh Valley through a half-dozen towns on its way to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. It wiped out nearly everything in between. But by many accounts, Johnstown suffered the most gruesome and disturbing fate of all. It is 1889, and the thriving industrial village of Johnstown is nestled deep within the lush, green Conemaugh River Valley in the Allegheny Mountains of central Pennsylvania. Johnstown and its surrounding towns and boroughs are happy and prosperous, with bustling industries and home to more than 30,000 people, many of whom are recent immigrants from Europe trying to make a living in America. Peacefully running through the valley and low-lying towns, the Little Conemaugh River and Stony Creek meander along their rocky channels until they unite to form the Conemaugh River near the Great Stone Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge in the heart of Johnstown, the Queen City of the valley. An important stop on the line, all railroad trains eastward bound stop there to catch their breath before beginning the long climb up the Allegheny Mountains on tracks that run along the riverbank. Johnstown was founded in 1791 by a German settler, Joseph Johns. The town became a center of navigation to western rivers, and over the next century became a place of shipment for iron and lumber. It became one of the busiest towns in one of the busiest states. The thunder of steam hammers, the roar of rolling mills, the clatter of thousands of anvils, the musical symphony of myriad machines could be heard night and day. The economic engine of the Conemaugh Valley was the Cambria Iron Works, built by pioneer ironworkers in the early 1800s. During the Civil War and booming industrial years following, the demand for iron grew tremendously to make products like cannons and railroad tracks, and with it grew the ironworks. By 1889, a large percentage of the people in the valley and their family members were employed by the Cambria Ironworks. 3/4 of them lived in small frame tenement houses built by the Cambria Ironworks close to the factory. The flimsy housing, cheaply constructed of wood, was located on the low-lying flats by the river. Some of the flats were artificially extended by the ironworks to create more building space. The artificial flats further narrowed the creek beds and made it so the land was not so far above the water even when the creeks ran low. A stranger visiting Johnstown or its suburbs the day before the disaster would have found all the evidence of happiness, comfort, and prosperity. The huge works were in their prime. The streets and stores were teeming with friendly people. Children played as they went to and from school. Trains were arriving and departing like clockwork. The whole place, one of the great industrial centers of Pennsylvania, was bustling with activity with no indication that a cataclysmic change was on the horizon. On Friday, May 31st, 1889, unaware of the events about to transpire, English miner Michael Mann was relaxing in his house near South Fork, not far from the lake, cooking his frugal meal. He was far from home, thinking of his wife and 2 sons back in England as he looked out at the incessant rain. The Tarbell family was taking a trip from their home in Cleveland. They were passengers on the Day Express, which made it as far as East Conemaugh before having to stop due to a washout on the line ahead. Mrs. Tarbell sat patiently with her son, waiting to resume their journey. Although 40-hour weeks and 8-hour days were still the sought-after goals of the labor movement, there was a professional class in Johnstown who could afford to stay home on a rainy Friday afternoon. Attorney James M. Walters, whose legal offices were on the 2nd floor of Johnstown's Alma Hall, was at home, relaxing with a cigar. Following a week of never-ending rain, Charles DeWald, a salesman visiting Johnstown from Altoona, was tired and wet. He retired to his room at Johnstown's luxurious Hulbert Hotel. He was the last person to go inside. And regardless of the weather, children continued to play. In the elementary schoolyard, boys held pickup games of baseball and football. Young girls, as was the custom of the time, pursued gentler pastimes on a wet afternoon, perhaps sitting by a window, using the weak daylight to read a book. 20 miles up the Conemaugh Creek from Johnstown was the South Fork Dam on Conemaugh Lake. It was built in 1852 after nearly 15 years of work. It was originally intended to be part of the old Pennsylvania Canal system, a transportation route used to move people and goods before railroads were widespread. The dam was constructed of watertight clay and was originally designed to regulate flow to a reservoir so the canals could be maintained at navigable depths. The reservoir was initially intended to be only 10 feet deep. If the water became too deep, the dam had one spillway to release excess water. In 1857, the Pennsylvania Railroad Company purchased the obsolete canal system, reservoir, and dam at auction from the state, and used the canal beds as foundations to lay railroad tracks. Over the next few years, minor, inexpensive repairs were made. Unsuitable materials such as mud, hay, and horse manure were used to repair and reinforce the dam. In addition, 5 cast iron pipes used to control the water level were removed and sold for scrap metal. The water level continued to rise. The small reservoir was now growing into a lake far more than 10 feet deep. Boating and fishing parties were a common sight on the new lake, and the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club was organized. This private club for the wealthy and elite consisted of 61 members, mostly prominent iron, coal, and railroad men, such as Andrew Carnegie, Andrew Mellon, Henry Clay Frick, and Henry Phipps. Times were good for the wealthy. The lake was stocked with 1,000 bass, and the dam's spillway was outfitted with a grate to prevent the fish from escaping. In a short time, what could scarcely be called a pond became a lake 3 miles long and over a mile wide. Most engineers are in agreement that earthen dams can last for hundreds of years if water does not enter the structure itself. If this occurs, by water flowing over the top or seeping into the earthen structure The dam quickly becomes saturated and collapses. A gentleman who lived in Johnstown for years said,
"We were afraid of the lake. No one could see the tremendous height to which the artificial dam had been built without fearing the tremendous power of the water behind it. The dam must have had a sheer height of over 100 feet, forcing the water high above its natural bed, high above our town." Rumors of an expected break were prevalent in Johnstown. It was that classic tale of a boy who cried wolf. But the dam always held, and over time, people began to disregard those tales.
Friday, May 31st, 1889. From a brooding sky of black, unbroken clouds came the storms that would change the town and Pennsylvania forever. It had been wet for several days. The creeks were overflowing, murky and noisy. The lake was higher than ever, but the valley below lay in fancied security. The varied activities of life went on as usual. The heavy rainfall raised the lake until water started pouring over the top of the dam, which at this time was completely saturated. Leaks began to grow in number, and relief crews were called in to try and secure the dam. Others tried to remove the grating over the existing spillway, but it was rusted and clogged with debris. It could not be cleared. And the South Fork and 100 minor streams sent in their swelling waters. The lake was full and rising at the rate of 1 foot per hour. The front of the dam resembled a massive sprinkler. 3 or 4 times during the day, men were sent to warn people below of their danger. Few listened.
Get out of here! The dam's about to break! Run!
I call you and your horse a coward. I'm staying.
It was approximately 2:45 in the afternoon when the stones in the center of the dam began to sink. Water began pouring through. At 3:10 p.m., the center of the dam gave way. The rushing water swept down the valley on its errand of destruction. Mr. Krause, proprietor of the South Fork Fishing Club Hotel, who watched the dam break, said that when the dam of Conemaugh Lake broke, the water seemed to leap, scarcely touching the ground, and bounded down the valley, crashing and roaring, carrying everything before it. For a mile, its front seemed like a solid wall, 50 feet high. A distant spectator said that at first it looked like dust, which must have been the spray. As it came nearer, he could see houses totter for a moment, rise, and the next moment be crushed like eggshells against each other. The flood was moving at approximately 40 miles per hour towards Johnstown, with 4 towns in between. The first town being South Fork. Michael Mann had just finished cooking his meal when screams that the dam was about to break pierced the air. Mann stepped outside to see what was happening, saw nothing, and believed that this would be another false alarm. His fate was quickly sealed. Within seconds, the tidal wave crushed his shanty. Many would remember him as the first victim of the Johnstown Flood. The flood's first major obstacle was the great stone viaduct halfway between South Fork and Mineral Point. It was the general opinion of engineers that the viaduct should have stood against the gigantic wave. They, however, underestimated the sheer power behind the raging water. The force of the water and debris instantly destroyed the bridge and the flood swept through. After emerging from South Fork with the ruins of the town and viaduct in its grasp, the flood swept down a narrow length of valley above the village of Mineral Point. There, it widened, thrust itself into the hollow, and swept away every house on the flat. These were soon welded into a compact mass with trees and logs and drift, which then added to the crushing force of the wave as it approached Conemaugh. A warning sound was heard at Conemaugh a few minutes before the rush of water came. But no one took notice. The low rumbling noise increased in volume and shook the earth. A sense of danger overwhelmed even the bravest a few minutes later, when the mighty wall of water burst forth. There was no time to escape. Many of the victims were whirled into the middle of the flood before they could even turn around. A passenger on a train that reached the Conemaugh Valley the very day of the disaster describes what she saw.
My train left Pittsburgh on time Friday morning, but was stopped for an hour by reports of a washout ahead.
There was a rumor that the reservoir at South Fork might break. Most of the passengers were uneasy. The porters of the Pullman cars remained at their posts and comforted the passengers with the assurance that the Pennsylvania Railroad Company always took care of its patrons.
Such a possibility as the carrying away of a train of cars on the Great Pennsylvania Railroad was never a thought seriously entertained by anyone.
The dam is burst! Run!
Soon the cry came that the reservoir had broken and water was sweeping down the valley. People rushed for the mountainside. Around the valley was the black head of the flood, its crest raised high in the air. And with this in view, even the weak found wings for their feet. The roundhouse had stalls for 23 locomotives. There were 18 or 20 there at this time. All of a sudden, there was an ominous crash, and the roundhouse and locomotives disappeared. Everything in the flood's path was first lifted into the air and then swallowed up by the churning waters. 100 houses were swept away in a few minutes. It took locomotives, carried them down, and dug holes for their burials. One locomotive was struck by a house and demolished in front of the terrified onlookers, many of whom died within arm's reach of safety.
Without warning, the whistles of every engine began to shriek. In the noise, I could hear the warning of the first engineer. "Rush to the mountains, the dam is burst!" As soon as the cry was heard, those who could leapt from the train and scrambled up the mountains.
The thundering rush of water was upon them. The waves had angry crests of white, and their roar was something deafening. In one terrible swell, the 4 trains were caught. 3 of them lifted right off the track as if they were only cork. There they floated in the river, 3 large locomotives and finely varnished Pullmans, and the hundreds of poor passengers, unable to escape, drifting towards death. Entangled in the sinking mess was the Day Express, with its baggage and express cars filled with more than 30 people, including the Tarbell family. Mrs. Tarbell's body was eventually discovered and sent back to her home in Cleveland for burial. Her boy was never found. After all this came the utter annihilation of the borough of Woodvale on the flat northeast of Johnstown. Woodvale had a population of nearly 1,000 people. J.J. McLaurin, editor of the Harrisburg Telegram, and witness to the flood's early destruction, remarked that words cannot lend impressiveness to the simple statement that only 9 or 10 families in Woodvale were not deprived of a father, mother, brother, or sister. 255 habitations were swept away, leaving not one house in Woodvale proper. Woodvale has ceased to be. The stream of human beings that was swept before the angry flood was something pitiful to behold. Men, women, and children were carried along, frantically shrieking for help, but their cries availed them nothing. Rescue was impossible. Husbands were swept past their wives. Children were borne along at terrible speeds to certain death before the eyes of their terrorized parents. Houses, outhouses, trees, and barns were carried on the angry waters. Horses and cattle standing in the fields were overwhelmed, and their carcasses strewed the tide. The railroad tracks were washed out, and wires in all directions were down. Down through the valley came the running waters, bringing with them all that stood in their way. Agonized men, women, and children clutched boards and timbers, their only hope of surviving the water's annihilating power. Their shrieks for help struck terror in the hearts of the onlookers. Carried along at railway speed on the breast of this rushing torrent, no human ingenuity could devise a means of escape. Those who were lucky enough to run away went to the mountains, and there they beheld the poor unfortunates being crushed to death among the debris. Here and there a body was seen to make a wild leap into the air, and then sink to the bottom. Johnstown, 3:37 p.m. Robert Miller, a survivor, recounted,
We saw a dark object up the river. Over it was a white mist. It was high and somehow dreadful, though we could not make it out. We did not wait for more. By instinct, we knew the dam had burst, and its water was coming for us.
In an instant, it came. The fiercest rush of water shot straight through Johnstown. There it entirely obliterated Cinder, Washington, Market, Main, and Walnut Streets. These streets were over a half a mile in length, closely crowded with buildings, which were swept away by the current. Mr. George Johnston, a lumber merchant of Pittsburgh, witnessed.
I heard a fearful roar up the valley. It sounded like a heavy train of cars, but soon became too loud and terrible for that. I boarded my train, and as I sat, a sight broke before my eyes that I'll remember until my dying day.
Away up the Conemaugh came a yellow wall, its crest white and frothy. Just then the train began to move. Terrified, he remembered feeling that he was in the safest place he could be, and sank back into his seat. And when he looked out again, what had been the busy mill yard of the Cambria Iron Works was a yellow, turbulent sea filled with houses and barns. The water rushing in upon the molten metal in the mills caused deafening explosions, which, coupled with the rumbling and grinding of the flood, made a terrifying uproar. Turning to the other side, he saw the muddy water sweeping through the main streets of the town. He could see men and horses floundering. Housetops were being filled with people who clung to each other, white with fear upon the rising flood. It had all come so quickly that none of them seemed to realize what had happened. The conductor of the train had been pulling frantically at the bell rope, and the train went spinning across the bridge, George sat transfixed with horror. Houses were rushing through beneath the train, and he did not know at what moment the structure would crumble beneath it. The train seemed to leap over the yellow rapids, and he wondered if it had left the rails and was flying through the air. His heart gave a bound of relief when they dashed into the forest on the hillside opposite the doomed town. He took one look back. The populous valley, for miles either way, was a seething, roaring cauldron. Miss Nina Speck, who was in Johnstown visiting her brother, recalled,
"We rushed upstairs and got out upon the bay window. An awful sight met our eyes. A mighty wall of water filled with houses and buildings of all sorts tossing over and over.
They crouched as the impact knocked their house off its foundation. The house moved rapidly down the stream and fortunately lodged against a strong building. The water forced them up into the attic, where they heard a lot of people on the roof begging to be let in. She broke through the roof with a bed slat and pulled them in. Soon they had 13 crouched in the attic. Their house was rocking, and buildings crashed against it. Every moment they thought they would go down. The roofs of the houses drifting by were covered with people, nearly all praying and some singing hymns. And now and then a house would break apart, and all would go down screaming.
All of a sudden, the roar of water burst upon our ears, and in an instant the streets are filled with debris. Great houses and large business buildings began to topple and crash on top of one another, as if they were toy blocks. People were drowning on all sides. One of our company was sucked downstairs and pulled away by the current. Vanished. The remaining members of our company, myself included, started to head upstairs, for the water was fast rising. When we finally got to the roof, we could see that whole blocks had been swept away as if by magic. We saw hundreds of people floating by, clinging to rooftops, rafts, timbers, anything they could get a hold of. It was then that we felt the hotel start to tremble, so we made our way to an adjoining roof. Soon afterward, part of the hotel went down. We finally climbed into a room with the last building within reach, and it was there we stayed all night. A company with 116 other people. Among them was a crazy man. His wife and kids had all been drowned earlier that evening. He was a raving maniac.
I can't take it, my family! They've all been swept away! They're all dead!
There was little sleep to be had that evening.
James M. Walters, the attorney who had taken that afternoon to relax at home, would come to spend Friday night downtown in Conemaugh. He was in his house when the flood struck, carrying away his home and drowning his entire family. Walters made it to the roof of his house and clung to it, sailing along with the rushing waters. Amazingly, his makeshift raft struck Conemaugh, and he was thrown into his own office on the second floor. But he was not alone. Over 200 persons took refuge in the hall through the night. Many knelt for hours in prayer. Their supplications mingling with the roar of the waters and the shrieks of the dying in the surrounding houses. The valley, stretching back in a straight line for miles, narrows near Johnstown between high hills. It is there that the large stone Pennsylvania Railroad bridge crosses the river. wall of water swept over the town and met the rushing waters of Stony Creek, recoiled off the mountain, and smashed into the stone bridge. There was a massive collision of forces. Johnstown's houses, people, animals, railroad cars, and trees were violently dashed against the unyielding bridge and jammed together into one solid mass, forming a dam that could not be swept away. The flooding channel of the Conemaugh was choked, and the water surged back, forming a massive whirlpool, further devastating what the first wave did not. Jacob Reese of Pittsburgh recalled
20 million tons of water, gathering fences, barns, houses, mills, and shops. Down the valley rushed this mighty avalanche of death, leaving nothing but death and destruction behind. When it struck the bridge at Johnstown, the debris was gorged, and the water dammed up 50 feet in 10 minutes.
The waves went around in circles, until most of the houses had been ground to pieces. There were men, women, and children who circled in the frightful vortex for an hour, unable to free themselves from the deadly waters. The force of the current was truly appalling. The best evidence of its force was exhibited in the massive debris south of the Pennsylvania Bridge. Persons who were watching from the hillsides declare that houses, solid from their foundation stones, were rushed onto destruction at the rate of 40 miles an hour. On one house, 40 persons were counted, their cries for help heard far above the roaring waters. At the bridge, the house parted in the middle, and the cries of the unfortunate people were smothered in the engulfing waters. The worst sight of all was the great fire at the bridge, which started when oil from an overturned freight car ignited. It made one's blood curdle to think of it. The lurid flames shot heavenward all night Friday, where hundreds of people floated right towards them to meet a death worse than drowning. To look at a sight like that and not be able to render a particle of assistance seemed too awful to bear. Sickened onlookers could hear the shrieks of men, women, and children, and the wild roar of a sea of water sweeping everything before it. Frank McDonald, a railroad conductor, recalled,
"I certainly think I saw 1,000 bodies go over the bridge."
The whole mass had caught on fire. Houses came down and struck the bridge, being smashed into a fiery inferno, incinerating the living inside. Others were crushed and screamed.
It reminded me of flies on flypaper, struggling to get away, with no hope and no chance of being saved, then fading away.
A little girl passed under the bridge just before dark. She was kneeling on part of a floor, and her hands were clasped as if in prayer. Every effort was made to save her. All proved futile. The Hulbert Hotel of Johnstown, a massive 3-story building of 100 rooms, vanished. There were 75 guests there at the time of the flood. Only 2 survived. Among the deceased was Charles DeWald, the Altoona salesman. His body was not found until June 15th. It was uncovered 100 feet from the building, under 20 feet of debris. There was a hole in his forehead at the bridge of the nose, possibly caused by a nail striking him as he went under. Papers and letters in his clothing made identification easy.
A beautiful girl came down on a door near a railroad signal tower. She screamed to the operators to save her. One brave man walked into the river as far as he could and shouted to her to guide herself into shore with a plank.
She was a spirited girl, and she attempted to row herself closer to the man. She made 2 or 3 bold strokes, actually stopping the course of the raft for an instant. Then, it swerved and went out from under her. She tried to swim ashore, but in a few seconds something struck her and she lay on her back, her face pallid and expressionless. And there she drowned. The mountains by this time were black with people, and the moans and sighs from those below brought tears to the eyes of even the most stone-hearted. From the mountain could be seen the panic-stricken marks in the faces of those who were struggling to survive. The scene was too revolting to endure. People continued to be flung to their deaths against the piers of the stone bridge, and when the fire started, scores of bodies were burned. Many witnesses on the mountains, especially the women, fainted. It was 4 o'clock. At 3:30, there had been a Johnstown. Now there was none. Gone were the homes, the businesses, and the dreams. Although bottled up at the bridge, the flood broke around and continued downstream from Johnstown toward the towns below, among them Sang Hollow and Bolivar. After night settled down upon the mountains, the horror of the scenes was enhanced. Above the roar of the water could be heard the hideous appeals from the victims as they were carried by. The startling news came in that more than 1,000 lives had been lost. By actual count, 110 people had been seen floating past Sang Hollow just before dark. 47 were counted passing New Florence, and the number had diminished to 8 at Bolivar. The oncoming darkness stopped any further count. Only by the agonizing cries that rang out above the water was it known that a human being was being carried to death. June 1st, 1889. That morning opened dark and dreary. Great drops of rain fell occasionally, and another storm seemed imminent. Everyone felt thankful that the weather remained cold to slow the decay of the bodies lying everywhere. All day long, men, women, and children were plodding about the desolate waste, looking in vain to locate the boundaries of their former homes. Nothing but a wide expanse of mud, ornamented here and there with heaps of driftwood, remained. Occasionally in the debris could be seen the remains of a victim, and the stench rising from the mud was sickening. It was impossible to describe the appearance of Main Street. Whole houses had been swept down and become lodged. The wreck was piled as high as the second-story windows. The ruins consist of parts of houses, trees, saw logs, and reels from the wire factory. Many houses had their side walls and roofs torn up. One could walk directly into what had been second-story bedrooms, or go in through gaping holes in the roof. At the beginning of the wreckage, near the opening of the valley of the Conemaugh, you could look up the valley for miles and not see a house. Of the rest of Johnstown and the collection of towns within sight of the bridge, not much is to be said. They are, to a greater or lesser extent, gone, as Johnstown is gone. Far up the gap, a large brick building remains standing, but ruined. It is all that is left of one of the biggest wire mills and steel works in the country. In the other direction are the works of the Cambria Iron Company. The buildings are still standing, but they are ruined, and the machinery is either totally destroyed or damaged beyond repair. One businessman said that he had visited Johnstown a dozen times a year for a long time and knew it thoroughly. After the flood, he didn't have the least idea of what part of town he was in anymore. Couldn't even tell the direction that the streets used to run. His bewilderment was no greater than that of the citizens themselves. They wandered about in the mud for hours, trying to find their homes and locate their families. A witness at the bridge said, "The peculiar stench of decaying human flesh is plainly perceptible as one ascends the bank of Stony Creek, along the smoldering ruins at the bridge." Searchers wandered wearily over the smoking mass. Occasionally, a sudden shout would come over the waters as a limb was found protruding from the mud, or a mangled body was spotted under a pile of wreckage. From the banks, many charred remains of victims were plainly visible to the naked eye, as the retreating waters reluctantly gave up their dead. Beneath almost every log or blackened beam, a glistening skull, or the scorched remnants of ribs or limbs, marked all that remained of life's hopes and dreams. One of the most horrible discoveries at the stone bridge was the body of a woman still clutching her dead child. In one place, the roofs of 40 frame houses were packed together, one on top of another. In another place was a human foot, but no signs of a body. Scenes like these occurred all over the charred field. Men worked with pick and axe, lifting out the shattered remains of human beings, nearly always mutilated past recognition or identification, except by guesswork. Articles of domestic use, scattered throughout the rubbish, helped to tell who some of the bodies were. A woman's dress, half burned, and part of a hat, told the story of one unfortunate's death. The schoolhouse in Johnstown was turned into the morgue, overflowing with bodies. The desks were used to display the dead. Former pupils lay dead on these desks. White pieces of paper pinned on the white sheets that covered them, giving their names. There were 2 rows of ghastly dead. To the right were 20 bodies that had been identified. To the left were the piles of nameless forms, many charred without limbs or heads. As people passed, hurried along by an attendant, they examined the uncovered faces, seeking to identify them. In turning a schoolhouse into a morgue, the authorities probably did a wiser thing than they first realized. It would be a long time before the schoolhouse would be needed for its original purpose, as a large number of the dead were children, unable to fight the current. Babies didn't even stand a chance after being swept away from their parents in the raging waters. One of the most famous survivors, Anna Fenn, a woman who lost 7 children and her husband in the flood, said,
"They are all gone. Oh, God be merciful to them. My husband and my 7 dear little children have been swept down with the flood, and I am left alone."
They were driven by the raging flood to the top floor of their house, where the waters followed them. It kept rising until their heads were crushing against the roof. It was death to remain, so she raised a window and one by one placed her darlings on some driftwood, trusting them to the great Creator. As she liberated the last one, her sweet little girl, she looked back and said,
"Mama, you always told me the Lord would take care of me. Will He look after me now?"
I saw her drift away, her loving face turned towards me. With a prayer on my lips for her deliverance, she passed from sight forever.
The next moment, the roof crashed in, and she floated outside to be rescued 15 hours later from the roof of a house in Kernsville.
The truth is that the bodies were as plentiful as the logs. The whirl of the water had put the bodies under, keeping the logs and the boards on top. The sight of those rigid arms standing out from those bloated, bruised bodies was just sickening.
Dr. D.G. Foster believed that a great number of the victims were killed by coming into violent contact with objects in the river and not by drowning. He found many fractured skulls, and on most heads, blows that would have rendered those receiving them instantly unconscious. The water did the rest. One of the first to reach Johnstown from a distance was a New York World correspondent who on Sunday wrote as follows. In one place, a woman was buried, only a limb showing. In another was a mother with her babe clasped to her breast. Further along lay two sisters, their arms wound around each other. Probably 50 bodies were seen on that one side of the river. In order to show the force of the current, he reported that he saw a grand piano lying on the bank and not a board or key was broken. In another place was a train car, smashed into a large building and totally intact. At the Cambria Iron Works, the two upper portions of the works were swept away almost entirely, and under the pieces of fallen iron and wood could be seen the bodies of more than 40 workmen. The scenes as he neared the railroad bridge were the most heartrending that he was ever called to look upon. Probably 3,000 people were scattered in groups along the Pennsylvania Railroad track, every one of them searching for relatives in the wreckage, mud, or in the still burning furnace. Hundreds of houses were turned on their sides, and in some cases, 3 or 4 stood one on top of each other. He stood on the stone bridge at 6 o'clock and looked into the seething mass of ruin below. At one place, the blackened body of a babe was seen. In another, 14 skulls could be counted. Further along, the bones became thicker and thicker, as if a concourse of people had been carried in a bunch and cremated. The smoke was still rising from the ghastly funeral pyre. So many of these lives could have been spared. According to people who live on the line of the river, ample time was given to them by the railroad officials and by others. In most cases, the warning was utterly disregarded, and those who heeded it early in the day were looked upon as cowards. Many jeers were uttered by lips that were now cold among the rank grass beside the river.
I call you and your horse a coward.
According to many newspaper reports of the time, there were vile acts of theft and vandalism committed to the helpless town after the flood. It was reported that amid all the suffering and sacrifice, heroism and generosity that was displayed in this awful time, there arose some revolting acts of man's selfishness. The lust for gain led many wretches to rob and despoil, even to mutilate the bodies of the dead. Pockets were searched, jewels were stolen, necklaces and earrings were torn away. Scores of bodies had been found in the days after the flood with their fingers cut off for rings. Orders were given that anyone caught stealing should be shot without warning. An old railroader who had walked from Sang Hollow stepped up to a number of men and said,
"Gentlemen, had I a shotgun with me half an hour ago, I would be a murderer now with no fear of ever having to suffer for my crime. 2 miles below here, I watched 3 men going along the banks, stealing the jewelry from the bodies of dead women and children."
He'd no sooner finished than he and several burly men were on their way to the scene of the atrocity. One with a coil rope over his shoulder. They found one of the wretches, who was in the act of cutting pieces from the ears and fingers of dead women.
Throw your hands up or we'll blow your head off!
Please, for the love of God, no!
He obeyed the order and begged for mercy. He was searched, and as his pockets were emptied, the fury of the crowd intensified. The bloody finger of a girl,
String him up!
encircled with a tiny ring, was found among the plunder. In less time than it takes to tell it, the man was strung up to a tree. Not content with this, the Vigilance Committee riddled his body with bullets. Shrouded in misery, the people of the Conemaugh Valley tried to move on with their lives and accept the fact that many of their homes, their belongings, and their loved ones had been claimed by this disaster. Practical matters had to be attended to. The wreckage of houses, factories, and bridges had to be removed before any rebuilding began, sometimes with dynamite. Working without modern machinery, citizens cleared out most of the debris with pickaxe and shovel. Sources of pure drinking water had to be secured. Temporary shelter had to be provided to the survivors, and medical care given to the wounded. And the dead, by the thousands, had to be buried. News of the disaster swept across the nation through the newspapers of the day. Reporters by the hundreds flocked to Johnstown to tell the tale of the great lake that burst upon the people below. The number of dead was impossible to calculate. Monetary and clothing donations were given by people all over the United States shocked by the disaster. A monumental relief effort was undertaken to provide food, blankets, medical care, and additional coffins to the badly damaged town. Even the famous Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, came to Johnstown after the disaster to assist in the relief effort. The final public act of the flood recovery effort was the dedication of a monument to the unknown dead on May 31st, 1892, paid for by the money donated from across the United States. More than 750 people were buried in the public plot, beneath unmarked graves in Grandview Cemetery, on a hill high above Johnstown. The flood was viewed as a freak of nature, a disaster of epic proportions. Many citizens of Johnstown did not view the flood as an act of God alone. Bitter feelings over the disaster were directed against the fishing club and many others. It seemed impossible that so much evil, so much destruction, could not have a plan and perpetrators behind it. However, no civil or criminal lawsuits were ever successfully brought against anyone concerning the cause or origin of the flood, and the town moved on. More than a century later, the Conemaugh Valley and Johnstown remain. The broken South Fork Dam still stands to this day and has been turned into a national park. The large valley that once housed the enormous lake is now vast and open, with a stream and railroad tracks running through it. The immense size of the dam and lake can be scaled to a bridge on U.S. Route 219, running parallel to the dam. The size and destructive force of the old lake is difficult to comprehend. Remnants of the flood are scattered throughout the heart of downtown Johnstown, including Alma Hall, where attorney James M. Walters spent his frightful evening. Grandview Cemetery continues to memorialize the victims of the flood, with its inspiring monument and gravestones untouched by the weathering of time. And the infamous Stone, Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge, now cemented over and free of burning debris, remains as an eerie reminder of May 31st, 1889.